The moment the glass doors slid open, every head in the marble-floored lobby turned. It wasn't every day someone like her walked into that kind of place. Evelyn Moore clutched her worn brown purse tighter. The leather cracked, corners frayed, and stepped into the high-ceilinged hall of Granville National Bank, the most exclusive financial institution in the city. The chandeliers glistened above her, scattering light across polished marble floors that looked too clean to touch. Her shoes, old nursing clogs from her hospital days, squeaked softly with every step. She didn't notice the stairs at first. Or maybe she did, but after 71 years, she had learned to pretend she didn't. The young receptionist behind the counter lowered her voice, but not enough. "Security," she whispered into her headset. "There's, a woman here. Looks lost." Two guards near the entrance exchanged smirks. One, a tall man with a tight vest and an even tighter jawline, started toward her. "Ma'am, the public banking area's downstairs," he said, his voice dripping with the kind of politeness that isn't really polite at all. "This floor's for private clients only." Evelyn blinked behind her bifocals. "Oh, I'm right where I need to be, sweetheart," she said softly, fishing a folded letter from her purse. "I just need to speak with Mr. Granville." The man's smirk grew. "Mr. Granville," he repeated, like it was the punchline of a joke. "Right. And I'm the Pope. Why don't I escort you?" "I said I need to speak with him," Evelyn interrupted. Her tone suddenly steady, the same tone she used decades ago when her ICU patients flatlined and panic wasn't an option. But that only made them laugh harder. "Ma'am, please," the receptionist chimed in now, her bright smile painfully fake. "We can't just call the CEO down because someone claims to know him. Maybe if you tell me what this is about, I can—" "I'm not here to claim anything," Evelyn said, still holding the folded letter. "I was asked to come. He sent for me." By now, whispers were rippling through the lobby. A few men in suits glanced up from their lattes. A woman in pearls actually covered her nose, as though Evelyn's floral perfume was somehow offensive. Security blocked her path. "Ma'am," the taller guard said, "if you don't leave right now, I'll have to—" "What's going on here?" The voice came from the mezzanine, calm, deep, commanding. Everyone froze. The guards turned. And there, descending the glass staircase with two executives at his side, was Daniel Granville, CEO of Granville National Bank, one of the youngest billionaires in the country. The staff straightened instantly. The air changed. "Sir, apologies," the receptionist stammered. "We were just handling—" But Daniel wasn't listening to her. His eyes were locked on Evelyn. He stopped halfway down the stairs. The confident, untouchable look he always carried melted from his face. His mouth opened slightly, not in shock, but something closer to heartbreak. He took another step, then another. The entire lobby went silent as he crossed the floor, his expensive shoes echoing like thunder in the hush. And then, before anyone could breathe, the billionaire CEO, the man whose signature could make or break fortunes, stopped in front of the trembling old woman. He didn't say, "Excuse me." He didn't ask, "Who are you?" He whispered one word, "Mom." The entire bank froze. The receptionist's smile collapsed. The guards looked like they'd been punched, and Evelyn's eyes filled with tears. "Hi, Danny," she said softly, the corner of her mouth trembling into a smile. The same Danny she hadn't seen in over 30 years. The same boy she'd raised after his mother, her best friend, died. The same boy she'd lost when the foster system moved him to another home after she got sick. And now, the same boy stood before her, a billionaire in a three-piece suit, while she clutched a bus pass and a letter that simply said, "Mrs. Moore, if you're still out there, I owe you my life. Please come see me." Daniel Granville. But no one else in that marble palace knew that. All they saw was an old black woman with trembling hands and tired eyes. And they had laughed at her. Daniel reached for her hand, gently, reverently, as though afraid she'd vanish if he blinked. Then he turned, his gaze sweeping over the room. "Who stopped her?" His voice was quiet, deadly calm. No one answered, because in that moment everyone realized they hadn't just mocked a stranger. They'd humiliated the woman who'd raised the man who owned this building. For a moment, no one moved. You could have heard a coin drop on that marble floor. The guards who'd laughed earlier now stood frozen, their faces pale. The receptionist, whose perfect manicure had trembled moments ago as she reached for her headset, now gripped the counter like it could somehow protect her from the storm that was about to break. Daniel still hadn't let go of Evelyn's hand. He held it with both of his, like a son afraid to lose his mother all over again. "Sir," one of the executives finally stammered, forcing a nervous smile. "We didn't know she was—" Daniel turned to him slowly, and that smile died in the man's throat. "Didn't know she was what?" Daniel asked quietly. "A person? A human being worthy of respect?" The question wasn't shouted, but it hit the room harder than any scream could. He let the silence stretch, deliberate, punishing, before continuing. "When someone walks into this building, what's the first thing you see?" No one answered. "Her skin?" he asked. "Her clothes? The purse that's seen more miles than your sports cars?" Still no one spoke. Evelyn tried to step in, her gentle instinct to diffuse tension rising after a lifetime of peacekeeping. "Danny," she whispered, "it's all right." They didn't know, but Daniel shook his head. "They should have known," he said. "They should have known the moment you spoke with kindness, the moment you stood your ground with dignity. They should have seen the same thing I saw when I was 9 years old, the woman who taught me how to be somebody worth becoming." Evelyn's eyes filled again, and she tried to look anywhere but at him. "Oh, don't make a fuss," she murmured. "People make mistakes." Daniel took a deep breath and turned to face the staff again. "You're right," he said, his voice steady now. "People make mistakes, but what matters is how they fix them." He nodded toward the nearest guard, the one who'd laughed loudest. "You," Daniel said. "What's your name?" Jason, sir." "Jason, tell me, did you laugh when she said she needed to see me?" Jason swallowed. I thought she was confused, sir." Daniel's jaw tightened. "You thought," he repeated, "and that thought told you it was okay to humiliate her?" Jason's lips parted, but no sound came out. Daniel pointed toward the receptionist next. "And you, when you called security, did you stop to think for even 1 second that maybe she had a reason to be here?" The young woman's face burned red. "No, sir," she said quietly. "I didn't." Daniel exhaled slowly. "Then I guess we have something to fix today." He turned toward the stunned lobby, his voice carrying through the marble and glass like a sermon. "This woman," he said, placing a hand on Evelyn's shoulder, "took care of me when no one else would. She gave me food when I had none. She taught me how to read when my teachers gave up. She used to tell me, 'Danny, don't let the world make you hard.'" He looked down, smiling faintly. "And somewhere along the way, I forgot that." The employees shifted uncomfortably, guilt washing through the crowd like a tide. A few lowered their eyes. One older banker actually wiped at his face. Daniel turned back to Evelyn. "Mom," he said softly, the word trembling with emotion. "I built this bank to help people, to build bridges, not walls. But somewhere along the way, we started thinking that wealth made us worth more." Evelyn smiled through tears. "You've done good, Danny," she said, voice barely a whisper. "You just forgot that good men still kneel sometimes." And with that, Daniel, billionaire, CEO, the man the news called the youngest titan on Wall Street, did something that would make headlines across the country. He knelt, right there, in the middle of his bank lobby. Every phone in the room rose instantly, recording, but for once, no one was mocking. They were witnessing something holy. Daniel bowed his head slightly, holding Evelyn's hand against his heart. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry they treated you this way. I'm sorry I ever built a place where that could happen." Tears rolled down Evelyn's cheeks. She cupped his face with both hands, her voice trembling but strong. "Oh, baby, stand up. You don't owe me that." "Yes, I do," he said, standing. "Because this isn't just about you. It's about every person we've ever made feel small when they walked into a place meant to serve them." He turned toward his stunned staff again. "Effective immediately," he said, "Granville National is launching a new policy. Every employee, from teller to executive, will complete empathy and community service training. We're partnering with local outreach programs to ensure this place reflects the people it serves, not the privilege of those who run it. A murmur rippled through the staff. Shock, awe, respect. And one more thing, Daniel added. From this day forward, Mrs. Evelyn Moore will hold the title of Honorary Chair of Community Relations. Her word in this building carries the same weight as mine. The receptionist's mouth fell open. The guards exchanged looks of disbelief. Evelyn just shook her head, smiling. Danny, I don't need a title. I know, he said, but they do. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, then swelling as more people joined. Customers stood, phones recording, tears glinting in their eyes. Because everyone in that lobby knew. They'd just witnessed something rare. A powerful man choosing humility over pride. That video would go viral within hours. But before that, Evelyn turned to Daniel and whispered something only he could hear. You always were a good boy, she said softly. Now go remind the world what that looks like. That night, long after the cameras stopped flashing and the lobby lights dimmed, Daniel sat alone in his corner office. The skyline glittered outside, Manhattan wrapped in 1,000 artificial stars. But for the first time in years, Daniel wasn't looking at it. He was staring at an old, creased envelope, the same one Evelyn had clutched in her trembling hands when she first walked into the bank that morning. It was addressed in neat, looping handwriting, the kind you almost never see anymore. To Daniel Moore, Granville National Headquarters. Below it, a tiny line read, From Evelyn May Moore. His throat tightened. She'd kept his last name all these years, even though she wasn't his biological mother. He traced the edge of the paper with his thumb. It was soft from years of being opened and folded again, like something she'd carried for a long time before deciding to deliver it. Finally, he broke the seal. Inside was a single page, written in that same gentle script. My dear Danny, if this letter ever finds you, it means I finally worked up the courage to step into that world of yours. The one built from dreams I used to hear about in a one-bedroom apartment on 112th Street. I don't want anything from you, baby. You've already given me more than I ever deserved. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for proving that kindness doesn't make you weak. That good boys can grow into strong men without losing their hearts along the way. I see you sometimes, on the news, in magazines. They call you America's youngest banking visionary. I call you my answered prayer. But lately I've been hearing other stories, too. Stories about people being turned away, spoken down to, feeling small in the same city you once promised to change. And that's what brought me to your bank, Danny. Not to see the man the world celebrates, but to find the boy I once knew. The one who used to say, one day no one will ever feel invisible again. I wanted to make sure that promise still meant something. If it does, then I can go home proud, knowing you didn't just build a bank, you built a bridge. Love always. Mom Daniel leaned back in his chair, staring at the letter until the ink blurred through his tears. He remembered every word. Every night in that tiny apartment, every dream whispered between stacks of unpaid bills and bowls of reheated soup. He remembered her saying, You don't need to be rich to change the world, Danny. You just need to be right with people. And somewhere along the way, between investors and stock tickers and quarterly goals, he'd lost that truth. That letter, that moment in the lobby, had brought it back to him. He looked out at the city again, but this time he didn't see towers and markets. He saw people, faces, stories like his. The next morning, Daniel arrived at the bank before sunrise. The cleaning crew startled when they found the CEO himself wiping down the lobby windows. Sir, you don't have to— I do, Daniel interrupted gently. We all do. By the time employees arrived, they found the man who signed their checks standing at the front door with coffee and bagels. Some thought it was a stunt. But then he gathered them together and told them about the letter. He didn't name names. He didn't point fingers. He simply read Evelyn's words aloud. And when he finished, the room was silent. the kind of silence that changes people. I built this company from nothing, Daniel said softly. But somewhere along the line, we stopped building people. We started measuring worth by wealth. That ends today. He looked around at his staff, faces of every age, color, and background, and continued. This bank is going back to its roots. We'll still handle billions, yes. But from now on, we'll measure success in how many hearts we help, not just how many accounts we close. He paused, his voice breaking slightly. And if anyone here ever makes another Evelyn Moore feel small, you'll answer to me personally. A murmur of agreement filled the room. Not applause this time, but something deeper, respect. That afternoon, Daniel made a quiet visit to Evelyn's apartment. It hadn't changed much. The same lace curtains, the same photo of a much younger Daniel in his graduation gown. When she opened the door, he didn't say a word. He just held out the letter. I got your message, he said softly. And I got the reminder I needed. Evelyn smiled through tears. You always were a good listener, she said. He chuckled. Not always, Mom, but I'm learning again. They sat together at the small kitchen table just like old times. No cameras, no crowds, just a son and the woman who raised him. Do you remember what you told me before my first interview? He asked. Which one, baby? The one at the gas station. Evelyn laughed softly. Oh, Lord, that one. I told you to smile even if your shoes had holes, he grinned. You said, don't let anyone see your struggle before they see your strength. She nodded, eyes glistening. And you didn't, Danny. You showed the world what strength really looks like. He reached across the table and took her hand again. No, he said quietly. You did. That night, Daniel posted the letter, with Evelyn's permission, on his company's website. Within hours, it spread across social media like wildfire. Hashtags trended. The letter. That changed banking. Evelyn's lesson. Human before title. People from all over the world shared stories of their own. Waitresses, janitors, retirees, young professionals, all describing times they'd been underestimated, dismissed or ignored. The story wasn't about a CEO anymore. It was about every person who'd ever been made to feel small, and the one person who finally stood up to make it right. That letter became more than a thank you note. It became a movement, a reminder that behind every sir and ma'am is a soul with a story. And sometimes, the most powerful person in the room isn't the one wearing a suit. It's the one who remembers what it means to be kind. By Monday morning, the story had gone viral. Every news channel in the country carried the headline, CEO calls elderly woman mom after staff mock her. Turns out, she raised him. Clips of the incident, shaky phone footage from a customer's smartphone, flooded the internet. The moment Daniel ran down the marble stairs, the look on his face when he embraced her, the shock on the guard's face, it was everywhere. Some viewers cried. Some called it a masterclass in humility, but not everyone was moved. In a glass-walled boardroom on the 40th floor, a very different kind of conversation was happening. Daniel, this is a PR wildfire, said Victor Lang, the head of public relations. Half the country thinks we staged the whole thing. Across the table, a woman in a crimson blazer, CFO Michelle Hart, folded her arms. And the other half wants us to apologize for our own employees' behavior. We can't win either way. Daniel sat at the end of the long mahogany table, silent. His tie was loose, his expression unreadable. Victor slid a tablet across the table. You've got 27 major news outlets requesting interviews. The Times wants an exclusive. Good Morning America offered a full segment. He looked up, waiting for a reaction. Nothing. Michelle leaned forward. Daniel, we need to manage this. It's emotional, yes, but it's also bad optics. Investors are spooked. We've already had 2 clients pull out of pending accounts. He finally looked up. Because I hugged my mother? The room went silent. That woman, Michelle corrected carefully, was perceived as a random customer. The guard's actions were unfortunate, but our investors don't like emotional unpredictability. They like control. Daniel leaned back, studying the faces around him, people he'd hired, trusted, built a company with. And for the first time, he saw them differently. not as colleagues, but as mirrors of the very system he thought he'd escaped. He stood slowly. "Do you know what she said in that letter?" he asked quietly. Victor blinked. "What letter?" Daniel reached into his suit pocket and pulled out the folded paper. She said, "I wanted to make sure the boy I raised still believed no one should ever feel invisible again." He let the words hang in the air, then he laid the letter on the table. "I built this company on that belief. If it's not true anymore, if the price of success is forgetting where we came from, then we're already bankrupt." Michelle frowned. "Daniel, idealism doesn't keep doors open. Investors do," he turned to her. "Then maybe it's time we open different doors." The tension in the room thickened. Some of the younger executives exchanged glances, hesitant, unsure whose side to take. Finally, one voice spoke up from the far end of the table. It was Malik Evans, a mid-level manager in community lending, one of the few who'd started on the ground floor with Daniel years ago. "Sir," Malik said quietly, "you remember when we opened our first branch in Newark? You told us we were going to change the story, make banks feel like places people could walk into without shame." Daniel nodded. Malik glanced at the others, then continued. "Maybe it's time we actually do that again." A few heads turned his way, some supportive, others cold. Michelle sighed. "That's not how corporate image works, Malik." He met her gaze. "Maybe corporate image is the problem." Daniel felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. He looked around the room. "I'm not interested in managing this story," he said finally. "I'm interested in living it." Victor looked exasperated. "Daniel, this isn't about your legacy. It's about shareholders." Daniel smiled faintly. "No, Victor. It's about humanity." He turned toward the floor-to-ceiling window, the city sprawling beneath them like a map of every person who'd ever been told, "You don't belong here." Then he faced the table one last time. From this day on, Granville National isn't just a bank. It's a promise. We're launching a program in Evelyn's name, the May Foundation. It'll fund small businesses started by seniors, caregivers, and people like her who've been forgotten by the system. Michelle's eyes widened. "You can't do that without a board vote." "Then call one," Daniel said calmly. "Because I just did." The next week was chaos. Stock analysts debated whether Daniel had lost his mind or become the face of a new kind of capitalism. Public opinion split, half cynical, half inspired. But for every critic who called it a stunt, there were hundreds of stories flooding in. Handwritten letters, emails, videos, from people who'd been told they were too old, too poor, too invisible, and one by one, Daniel read them all. One stood out. A letter from a woman in Detroit named Lorraine. "I used to clean offices for banks like yours. Never thought I'd be worth more than a mop. But after seeing what you did for your mom, I applied for a small business loan. Got approved yesterday. My new shop opens next month. Thank you for reminding me I'm still seen." Daniel printed that letter and framed it beside Evelyn's. A few days later, an emergency board meeting was called. Investors had flown in from across the country. The chairman, an older man with silver hair and a perfectly folded pocket square, didn't waste time. "Daniel, your public statements have cost this company 2% of its market share in a week." Daniel didn't flinch. "And gained us millions of hearts." "This is business, not charity," the chairman shot back. Daniel smiled faintly. "You're wrong. It's both. Always has been." The vote was split. Half the board wanted him removed as CEO, half stood by him. In the deciding moment, Malik, now promoted to Director of Community Lending, stepped into the room with a folder. "Before you vote," he said, "you should see this." He handed out reports showing record new account openings from senior citizens, small business owners, and community groups. The numbers were staggering. "The public trusts us again," Malik said simply. "Not because of ads. Because of Evelyn Moore." The chairman looked down the table, silent for a long moment. Then he sighed. "Proceed, Mr. Moore." Daniel nodded once. "Thank you. Let's build something worth believing in." When he walked out of that room, Daniel didn't head for his car. He went straight to Evelyn's apartment. She was waiting by the window, humming softly as if she already knew. "How'd it go, baby?" she asked with a smile. He knelt beside her chair and took her hand. "It went just like you said it would," he murmured. "Love always wins, even in a bank." It started with a single bouquet of lilies left at the bank's entrance. No note, no camera crew, just white flowers, and a small ribbon that read, "For Mrs. Evelyn Moore, the mother of integrity." By the next morning, there were dozens. By the afternoon, hundreds. Elderly women, construction workers, single moms, young bankers, all standing quietly in front of the glass doors that had once been slammed in Evelyn's face. Some brought flowers. Some brought handwritten notes. Some simply stood in silence, holding each other's hands. It wasn't a protest. It was something gentler, something stronger. A thank you, written in presence. Inside, the staff watched in stunned silence. The same guard who'd laughed at Evelyn that day stood near the window, his jaw tight, eyes red. He hadn't spoken much since. Word around the building was that Daniel hadn't fired him, not because he didn't deserve it, but because he wanted him to learn. And the man had learned. When the morning crowd grew too large, he stepped outside, cleared his throat, and said, "If you're here for Mrs. Moore, please, come inside." The lobby's open. For the first time, he held the door open wide, and the crowd began to move, slowly, reverently, into the same building where Evelyn had once been mocked for daring to step in. Cameras began to arrive by noon. Local stations, then national news anchors stood outside with solemn voices, describing the unexpected public outpouring of love for the woman whose story reminded America of its humanity. Daniel stood in his office watching through the glass. He should have been proud, and he was. But what he felt most was awe. Because none of this was planned. None of this was PR. It was real. He turned to Malik. "Tell her she needs to come down here," he said softly. "It's time she sees what she's done." Evelyn arrived 2 hours later. Not in a limousine, she refused that. She came in a modest taxi, wearing her Sunday best, the same soft pink dress she'd worn to church the morning Daniel graduated college. As she stepped out, the crowd parted like water. Phones lowered. Whispers rippled through the air. "There she is. That's her, Mrs. Moore. God bless that woman." For a moment, Evelyn froze, overwhelmed by the sight of hundreds of strangers staring at her like she was royalty. She adjusted her purse, took a breath, and began to walk. The security guard, and the same one who'd laughed at her, stepped forward. His voice trembled. "Mrs. Moore, I don't deserve to say this, but I'm sorry. For everything." Evelyn looked at him kindly. "Son, you already said it, by opening that door today." He swallowed hard, then nodded, unable to speak. Inside, the lobby had been transformed. The marble floors gleamed. But what caught her eye were the portraits on the wall, not of executives, but of everyday people. Small business owners, teachers, caretakers, retired veterans, and right in the center, framed in gold, hung a photo taken decades ago. A young Evelyn Moore holding a little boy's hand outside an old apartment building. The boy was smiling wide, his school uniform slightly too big. The caption beneath it read, "The beginning of a promise." She gasped softly, her hand flying to her chest. Daniel approached from the crowd, tears already gathering in his eyes. "You remember that day?" he asked, smiling faintly. She nodded, voice trembling. "That was your first day of school. You were so scared," he chuckled. "And you told me, 'Don't worry, baby. When people act like they can't see you, just shine brighter.'" He took her hands gently. "Well, Mama, you're shining now." Then a journalist stepped forward. "Mrs. Moore, millions of people across the country are watching this live right now. Is there anything you'd like to say to them?" Evelyn blinked, clearly surprised. Then she turned toward the cameras, her posture straightening. Her voice was soft but steady. "I don't have much to say, baby. But I'll tell you this. The way you treat people when you think no one's watching, that's who you really are." The room went silent. She continued, her tone calm but commanding. "I didn't raise my son to be rich. I raised him to be kind. And I guess kindness pays better than I thought. The crowd laughed gently through tears. She smiled. So if you see someone struggling today, don't look away. You might be standing in front of the person who's going to change the world. Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. Reporters wept openly. And Daniel, he just stood there, his chest swelling with a pride words couldn't hold. That night, every major network aired the moment. Evelyn's quote became an instant classic, printed on posters, tweeted by celebrities, even used in church sermons across the country. The way you treat people when you think no one's watching, that's who you really are. By morning, the hashtag Mother of Integrity was trending. Globally, banks, schools, nonprofits. They all began launching kindness, initiatives under her name. But the most powerful moment came 3 days later, at the National Leadership Summit in Washington. Daniel was invited to speak. But when he took the stage, he surprised everyone. He gestured toward the front row. "My mother's here today," he said, his voice cracking. "She's the reason I ever believed compassion could belong in boardrooms." The crowd rose to its feet, applauding. Then Daniel stepped aside. "Mom, would you like to say a few words?" Evelyn's eyes widened. "Oh, Lord, no, not me." But the audience was already cheering her on. She walked up slowly, gripping the podium. Her fingers trembled at first, but her voice didn't. "I never thought I'd stand somewhere like this," she began. "I never thought anyone would care what a maid or a mother had to say. But here we are. And all I can tell you is, if you want to build something that lasts, build it out of respect. Because marble cracks, money fades, but love," she paused, smiling. "Love don't depreciate." The hall erupted. Thunderous applause that lasted nearly a minute straight. For the rest of her life, Evelyn would never again be the woman security laughed at. She'd be the mother who reminded the world what success looks like when it has a soul. Success moves fast. In the weeks following the viral moment, Daniel's bank became the talk of the financial world. Every headline carried some variation of the same message. The CEO who called his mother Mom on live TV restores America's faith in business. Stock prices soared. Investors poured in. And competitors started copying his policies overnight. But fame, as Daniel knew too well, was a double-edged sword. By the end of the quarter, he was sitting in a glass conference room surrounded by shareholders, the same men who had once mocked his idealism. Now their smiles were sharper than ever. "Daniel," began Mr. Claiborne, the board chairman, his voice smooth as silk, "your mother's story did wonders for our public image. But now we need to capitalize on that momentum." Daniel frowned. "Capitalize how?" The older man slid a folder across the table. "A proposal from Eastline Holdings. They want to acquire Moore Capital Bank. $1.8 billion. Cash." A hush fell over the room. Every executive in the room knew what that meant. Retirement money for all of them. A golden ticket. But Daniel didn't touch the folder. "What's the catch?" he asked. Claiborne's smile flickered. "Just a small rebranding. They want to close some of the smaller community branches, replace local staff with automation, restructure the ethics oversight board you created." Daniel leaned back slowly. "So basically, strip out everything that makes us different." Claiborne gave a tight smile. "It's business, son. Not Sunday school." That last word hit like a slap. Son. Not because of disrespect, but because of what it triggered. Daniel saw his mother's hands, the same hands that once cleaned other people's homes so he could go to college, the same hands that had been mocked when they reached for a bank pen, the same hands that had held his face the night before his first board meeting and whispered, "Do good, not just well." The boardroom buzzed as the others began debating figures, percentages, and strategic synergies. But Daniel didn't hear any of it. He heard his mother's voice again, steady, proud, the way you treat people when you think no one's watching, and that's who you really are. The irony stung, because now everyone was watching. He stood up quietly, cutting through the chatter. "Gentlemen," he said, "give me one night. I'll have your answer tomorrow." Claiborne shrugged. "Take your time, Daniel. But understand, this deal won't wait." Daniel nodded, left the folder on the table, and walked out. He drove home that night in silence, city lights flickering against the windshield. At a red light, he glanced at his phone. Dozens of unread messages from investors and journalists. But one stood out. "Mom, he opened it. Baby, I saw the news. Don't forget who you are. Money's nice, but peace of mind's better. Love you." He stared at it for a long time. Then, almost involuntarily, he whispered, "Love you too, Mama." The next morning, the boardroom was packed. Every major investor dialed in on video. The air smelled like expensive coffee and quiet greed. Claiborne sat at the head, tapping his pen. "So, Daniel, have you made your decision?" Daniel didn't sit. He stayed standing, the same way his mother had stood at that lobby years ago, calm but unmovable. "I have," he said. He reached for the folder, flipped it open, and tore it cleanly in half. The room gasped. Then, silence. "I won't sell," he said simply. "Not now, not ever. This bank was built to serve people, not sell them out. My mother didn't raise me to trade decency for dollars." Claiborne's face darkened. "Do you realize what you're throwing away?" Daniel met his gaze. "Yes, everything I never needed." He turned toward the rest of the board. "You all remember the viral video? The one that made people believe in us again? That wasn't marketing. That was truth. And if we lose that, we don't have a brand. We have a hollow building with money inside." Someone muttered under their breath, "He's committing career suicide." Daniel smiled faintly. "Then I'll die with integrity." He walked out before anyone could stop him. By afternoon, the financial press exploded with headlines. CEO rejects $1.8 billion buyout over ethics. Industry stunned. More capital chooses people over profit. Reporters camped outside his office. Commentators called him naive. But the public, especially the older generation, loved him. Talk shows filled with callers saying things like, "That young man's mother raised him right." Finally, a businessman with a conscience. Even the president mentioned him during a televised address about restoring trust in American institutions. But for Daniel, none of that mattered. He didn't want applause. He just wanted peace. That evening, he drove to his mother's house. The same little home on the corner lot, the same porch swing creaking softly in the breeze. Evelyn was there watering her roses. When she saw him, she smiled. "Well, look who decided to visit the old lady," he grinned. "Had to check in with my board of directors," she chuckled. "What did the board decide?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "I turned down the buyout." Her hands froze mid-air. "Baby, oh, that was the billion-dollar one, wasn't it?" He nodded. She set down the watering can and turned to him. "Why?" He smiled softly. "Because you were right. Money fades. Love don't depreciate." Her eyes glistened. "Oh, Daniel." He shrugged lightly. "Besides, if I ever forget, I know exactly who'll remind me." Evelyn laughed through tears and hugged him tight. And for the first time in years, Daniel felt weightless. No shareholders. No headlines. No billion-dollar pressure. Just a son. And his mother, standing in a backyard full of blooming roses, watching the sun set on a day that could have bought him everything, but instead gave him something better. Peace. Months passed. The world didn't end because Daniel Moore said no to $1 billion. In fact, it got quieter. The frenzy of cameras eventually moved on. The pundits found new controversies to debate. But something else began happening. Quietly, steadily, almost like the bloom of spring after a brutal winter. It started with letters. Handwritten ones. The mailroom at Moore Capital began filling with envelopes, not from investors, but from ordinary people. A retired teacher from Michigan wrote, "Your mother reminded me of why I chose to serve, not sell. Tell her thank you." A teenage girl from Atlanta scribbled, "I showed my dad your video. He cried for the first time in 10 years. He said he's proud of me again." Even a police officer from Ohio wrote, "I stopped judging people who walk into our lobby looking nervous. Sometimes they just need a little respect." Evelyn would sit by the fireplace reading them one by one, glasses perched on her nose, shaking her head softly. "These people make me out to be some kind of saint," she said once. "All I did was raise my boy right." But Daniel knew better. All she did was everything. Soon, schools began inviting Evelyn to speak. Elementary kids would gather in gymnasiums, waving little signs that read, "Be kind like Mrs. Moore." She'd laugh and tell them, "You don't have to be rich to be decent. Just remember that everyone's carrying something you can't see." Her words hit deeper than she realized. Clips of her speeches went viral. Again. Except this time, it wasn't about money, fame, or a headline. It was about values. A local journalist put it perfectly. In a world obsessed with power, Evelyn Moore reminded us that grace is power too. Meanwhile, Daniel's leadership quietly redefined what banking looked like. He launched a nationwide initiative called Project Open Door, transforming dozens of old bank branches into financial learning centers for low-income families. No judgment, no jargon, no turning people away for not looking the part. And on the glass doors of every new center, etched in elegant gold lettering, were 6 simple words. Kindness is the best collateral. His board thought it was sentimental, but customers loved it. It became a movement. By the second year, the ripple had gone global. News outlets from London to Lagos ran specials about the Moore model, an approach to business that balanced profit with compassion. Harvard Business Review published an article titled, "When Love Becomes Leadership." Charities partnered with Moore Capital to fund literacy programs and micro-loans for single mothers. One TV anchor summed it up. "It's like someone lit a candle in the middle of corporate America, and for once it didn't go out." Evelyn became something of a national treasure. She didn't seek the spotlight, but it found her anyway. She'd get stopped in grocery stores by strangers saying, "You raised a good one." She always smiled and replied, "I just kept him from forgetting where he came from." But there was one moment that stood above the rest. It happened at the National Ethics in Business Awards. Daniel had been nominated, the youngest CEO ever considered. The hall was glittering with chandeliers, gowns, tuxedos, and quiet envy. When they announced his name, Daniel stood, adjusting his tie. But instead of walking to the stage, he turned to his mother. "Mama," he whispered. "Come with me." Her eyes went wide. "Oh, no, baby, this is your night," he smiled. "No, it's ours." Together, they walked down the aisle, the billionaire and the maid who once couldn't even step into a bank without being judged. The audience rose to their feet before he even spoke. When Daniel reached the podium, he handed the golden plaque straight to her. "This," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "belongs to the woman who taught me what real wealth means. I used to think success was about how high you climb, but my mother showed me it's about who you lift while you're climbing." Evelyn's hands trembled as she took the award. The crowd was silent, many wiping tears, and then slowly they began to clap. A standing ovation that felt less like applause and more like a thank you to every unsung parent, teacher, cleaner, and worker who ever built something beautiful without recognition. After the ceremony, as they walked out beneath the soft city lights, Evelyn looked up at her son and said quietly, "You made me proud long before the world ever knew your name." Daniel smiled. "That's all I ever needed to hear." She squeezed his hand. "Then promise me something, baby. Anything. Don't let them turn you hard. This world will try over and over, but the moment you start thinking you're better than the people you serve, that's when you stop being my son." He nodded slowly. "I promise, Mama." That promise became the foundation of everything that came next. Within a year, Moore Capital launched the Evelyn Initiative, a foundation dedicated to supporting working mothers pursuing education. They offered scholarships, housing stipends, and small business loans, all in her name. When asked about it at a press conference, Daniel said simply, "My mother gave everything she had so I could learn. Now it's time to give back, in her honor." Reporters described it as one of the most heartfelt corporate commitments in recent memory. But for Evelyn, it wasn't about the headlines. She just smiled when the first group of young mothers graduated. She walked up to one of them, a tired but glowing woman holding her baby, and said softly, "Don't thank me, honey. Just pass it on." The woman nodded through tears. "I will, ma'am. I promise." One act of kindness, One moment of dignity in a bank lobby had grown into a movement touching thousands of lives. People began calling Evelyn America's mother. But to Daniel, she was still just Mama, the woman who taught him that humility doesn't make you smaller, it makes you stronger. And for the millions watching their story unfold, it wasn't just inspiration, it was permission. Permission to believe that decency still mattered, that maybe, just maybe, doing good could still lead to something great. Winter came early that year. The first snow fell quietly over the city, blanketing the streets in soft, white silence. Inside a quiet brownstone apartment overlooking the park, Evelyn Moore sat by the window, a thick blanket over her legs and a cup of chamomile tea cooling beside her. Her hair had turned silver, a gentle crown of years well lived, but her eyes were still bright, still warm. She watched the snow falling and whispered, almost to herself, "Looks like powdered sugar on Sunday biscuits." Daniel chuckled softly from across the room. He'd come straight from a board meeting, tie loosened, sleeves rolled up. But the moment he walked into her apartment, the weight of the corporate world seemed to melt away. Always thinking about food, "Mama," he teased. "Always thinking about comfort," she replied, smiling faintly. "And comfort starts in the kitchen." He knelt beside her chair, tucking the blanket closer around her legs. "You cold?" "Not yet," she said, patting his hand. "But I'm tired, baby. Not the kind of tired sleep fixes." He froze for a second, then forced a smile. "You just need to rest more." She looked at him quietly, the way only mothers can, seeing through the words, right into the fear behind them. "Daniel," she said softly, "don't be afraid of me going home." His throat tightened. "Don't say that, Mama," but she did, gently, calmly, like she'd been ready for it longer than he had. "I've had a good run. The Lord's been kind to me. I got to see my boy grow into a man with a heart that shines brighter than any skyscraper in this city." She paused, smiling weakly. "Now that's what I call wealth." Tears slipped down his face before he could stop them. He reached for her hand, holding it tight. "I'm not ready," he whispered. She squeezed back, her voice trembling but strong. "You were never supposed to be. That's how you know you loved right." The days grew shorter after that. Evelyn's health faded gently, not suddenly, like the last light of dusk stretching across the sky. Daniel moved most of his meetings online just to be with her. Sometimes they'd sit in silence, the only sound the ticking of her old kitchen clock. One afternoon, he found her at the table with an envelope and a pen. "What's that?" he asked. "A letter," she said. "For you," he frowned. "You can just tell me," she smiled. "Some things, baby, you gotta read more than once." She passed quietly 2 weeks later, in her sleep, just after sunset. The nurse said she looked peaceful, like she'd been waiting for the right moment to go. When Daniel arrived, he didn't speak. He just sat beside her, holding her hand one last time, whispering, "Thank you, Mama, for everything." The funeral was small, just family. Close friends and a few employees who had become like family, too. But outside the church, hundreds stood in the cold, holding candles. People who had never met Evelyn in person. Mothers, students, janitors, even executives. All gathered to pay respect to the woman who'd reminded them that kindness still mattered. The choir sang "His Eye is on the Sparrow," and when Daniel stood to speak, his voice broke halfway through. "My mother didn't leave behind money or mansions," he said. "She left behind something better. Proof that you don't need power to make a difference. You just need love that refuses to quit." A few weeks later, when he finally gathered the courage to open the letter she'd left him, he found it written in her careful, looping handwriting. "My dearest Daniel, if you're reading this, I'm already home. Don't cry too long, baby. I've had more joy than most people get in 10 lifetimes. You remember when you were little and used to say, 'Mama, one day I'll buy you a big house'? Well, you did. Not with money, but with love. You built a world where people can walk through the door and be seen, not judged. That's the biggest mansion there is. Keep doing good even when nobody's watching, especially then. And remember, when the world tries to make you hard, be softer still. That's where the miracles hide. In softness. Love you more than words, Mama." Daniel folded the letter and held it to his chest. And for the first time in years, he let himself cry, not from pain, but from gratitude. Months later, Moore Capital unveiled a new headquarters downtown, sleek glass towers with an entire floor dedicated to the Evelyn Moore Foundation. At the center of the lobby stood a bronze statue. Evelyn, sitting in her favorite kitchen chair, one hand resting on her lap, the other reaching out, open. Welcoming beneath it, engraved in shining brass, were her final words, "Be softer still." Every morning, employees would touch the statue's hand before starting work. Visitors took photos. Some even prayed beside it. And though she was gone, Evelyn Moore's presence lingered, not in the marble or metal, but in every act of quiet kindness that happened within those walls. One rainy afternoon, a young intern approached Daniel as he stood looking out the window. "Sir," the intern said, nervous, "I just wanted to say, your mother's story made me change how I treat people. I used to think success meant stepping over others. Now I see it means lifting them." Daniel smiled faintly. She'd like that. Then he glanced up at the sky where the clouds had begun to part. A thin ray of sunlight broke through, casting a warm glow across the city. "Maybe she's watching," the intern said. Daniel nodded. "Oh, she is," he whispered. "She always is." As he turned to leave, his reflection shimmered on the glass, his mother's statue just behind him, her hand forever reaching forward. And for a fleeting moment, it almost looked like she was still there, still guiding him, still proud. They laughed when she walked into that bank. They stopped laughing when the CEO called her Mom, because some titles, like love, grace, and decency, are worth more than any fortune, and the woman who lived by them changed the world.